This is Jeremy, and this is the second follow-up video for the Sense electricity monitor. If you haven't seen the first two videos, you can click here on the left to view them, or go into the description for links. It's now been 171 days since I installed the Sense monitor in September of 2016, and 91 days since the second video. In that time, Sense has identified a new load, which is my fridge, and it's also lost a small motor, which now no longer shows up. All in all, I have 9 devices, everything from the fridge, coffee maker, flavor wave oven, stove, HVAC, 2 sets of LED lights, and my desktop computer. While this is not as many as other users have been reporting, again, your mileage may vary depending on the loads in your home. Other users online have reported as many as 24 devices within the first couple of weeks, so it does seem like device detection is getting better. Conversely, other users have reported that they haven't seen new devices detected in weeks, so it still has a ways to go. One of the things that I haven't gone through that I'll go through quickly now is the app itself. On the main screen you have 2 bubbles, the unknown bubble and the always on bubble. This always on bubble has led to some confusion because users expect it to update immediately, but it's a rolling average. So for instance, devices that haven't been identified that operate 24 hours a day will show up in always on. So these can be things like your fridge or other devices, and depending on your utility you may even be able to see this because they can identify devices that run when there's no user interaction. So for instance, overnight when you're sleeping, there's going to be loads running and your utility will be able to identify things like your router being always on, or other devices that draw vampire loads that are always on. Next up is usage, which shows you the different trends. And this allows you to drill down and see things daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly. You can also see how much each device and category takes up. So 50% is always on, unknown is 35%, the fridge uses 9.1%, HVAC uses 2.2%, the stove uses 2.5% combined, and the oven and the computer uses 0.1%. At the bottom is the power meter, and in here you can scroll back and see the actual devices coming on and off. You can also shrink it or expand it. In devices, you can see everything that's been identified as well as your unknowns. And clicking in, you can see individual information about a specific load. Here's also where you'll edit and enter in your information. Lastly, you have settings, and this allows you to get your account information as well as devices it's trying to learn. Sense also introduced in the beginning of March data sources, and this allows Sense to listen for broadcast packets to help it identify internet connected devices or devices on your local area network. So for instance, your TV, when it turns on, it may send out a broadcast packet, your receiver, your cable box, or other devices. Help allows you to help as a guide. As well, the top right button is feedback, reporting a problem, or feature requests. You can also submit these things through the Sense community forum. About gives you information about the app. Going back to my breaker panel, I'd started shooting this follow-up video about 5 weeks ago, so at about 183 days, give or take. And I've been busy with other things, but on Tuesday, April 4th, Sense sent me an email saying they detected an error with my Sense unit. So a few weeks back, I had installed this third energy monitor, and I had done some rearranging of my breakers. When I did that, I inadvertently plugged both of Sense's voltage inputs into the same phase, so they're both on phase B. If you're like me and you didn't want to install or didn't have space for another 240 volt breaker, you can use a Moret or an Insure to tap into an existing breaker. And that's what I had done with 2 breakers on opposite sides. But since they're single pole breakers, 120 volts, they are actually both on the same phase. So if you are tapping into existing breakers and you want to check if they're on different phases, you can use a multimeter and check for the voltage. So for instance, these two are on opposite sides, but they're on the same phase. So you're going to get no voltage between them. Move up to another breaker and you'll get your 200 plus volts in between the different phases. So that's why all the devices that Sense had detected were only on this phase, because the voltage inputs were only plugged into this side. Once I made the correction with Sense plugged into both sides, so here and here, the first thing I noticed was that the unknown and the always on, it changed because it was obviously detecting properly the devices on both sides. So I'll give it a few more weeks and hopefully the device detection picks up as it picks up all the devices on this side. So this happens to be the kitchen, the dishwasher, and other devices that I've been wondering why Sense hasn't detected yet. That little setback aside, which most people won't encounter because they'll be using an electrician to install their Sense, and they won't be messing around in their panel like I am with all these different meters. The good news is, for all the devices on the right side, Sense was incredibly accurate, so the bedroom lights, the computer, and other things. And I'm hoping now that everything's been corrected, device detection will resume and pick up for everything else in my home. Other users have also reported that Sense has been able to detect a device as low as 10 watts. Now I'm going to take a look at some questions as well as other aspects of the Sense monitor. The first question is, why do so many things show up as motors or heating elements? So to answer that, I'm in the kitchen where a lot of these loads are. A kettle is a heating element to heat the water. An electric stove is a heating element. If you go up to look at a microwave, it has a motor to turn the turntable. Some users have even reported that Sense has isolated the light bulb inside the microwave as well as the actual microwave or the magnetron itself. Going over to a coffee maker, you have a small pump to pump the water, and then you have a heating element to heat the water to make your coffee. Looking at a fridge or freezer, you have a compressor, which is essentially a motor. Going over to the dishwasher, there's a motor to pump the water and control the water flow, and then there's a heating element to heat the water up to the right temperature. And that's why so many things that aren't electronics show up as heating elements or motors. The next question is, how come heating elements show up as spikes? So for instance, if I turn on a stove and turn it on to low, what's actually happening is it turns on for a set amount of time and then it turns off because it can't actually vary the amount of power going into the heating element, and that's why it shows up as spikes on the graph. The next question is, what does Sense do with multi-mode devices or loads that have multiple components inside? So for example, this vent hood has multiple speeds, and Sense may detect that as multiple devices, but as of August, you can now merge all those loads into a single device. Similarly, for a dryer, there's the motor and the heating element, and now you can actually merge those together into a single load. One of the things that has improved since the last review, as you can see, is the computer's drawing variable wattage, and it does show up all under the computer. Previously, it would show up as a 90 watt base load, and anything extra, like when I was rendering or doing something graphic intensive, it wouldn't show up here. It would show up under unknown, but now everything shows up underneath the computer. So hopefully this smarter detection does extend to other devices like the fan hood with multiple settings and other loads that have multiple settings. Next up, users have asked if Sense can detect devices that are plugged into UPSs. So for that, I'm going to take a look at two loads that Sense has already detected and isolated. I've set up both UPSs, and they're both on the same circuit. On the left is the active PSC UPS with true sine wave output, and on the right is the simulated sine wave output. Again, they're both plugged into the same circuit. And I'll be plugging in the LED strips to test. On all UPSs, you have two sets of outlets. One set is a surge only, which is essentially a pass-through. It doesn't affect the device signature. And then one set runs through the UPS's circuitry, which handles things like noise, over and under voltage, and other issues with your power. So the concern is, using these UPS outlets, does the device signature get altered too much that Sense can't detect it? First up, I'm going to plug it into the pass-through, and the light shows up. Unplugging it, light disappears, just as expected. Now, plugging it into the UPS outlets. Again, it detects it, and it disappears. For the simulated sine wave output, I wasn't too concerned. I was more worried about the active PFC because it does do much more filtering. Moving over to the active PFC UPS, first up, the surge only outlets. So it still shows up as expected. Now moving over to the filtered outlets. And it does show up. So despite the additional circuitry in the active PFC UPS, Sense is able to detect the load. Repeating this test with a more complex load, my custom-built desktop computer, and dragging out the APC rack mount UPS from my media closet, plugging the desktop into each of the 3 UPSs, Sense is still able to detect the desktop computer. So it does look like Sense is able to detect devices that are plugged in and running off of UPSs. Moving on to new features and functions, in March, Sense introduced IFTTT integration, if this then that, which is a web service that ties into a variety of services like Logitech, Google Docs, email, SMS, etc. You can use one of their pre-made apps to send yourself an alert when a device turns on and off. You can log the data to Google Sheets, or you can create your own custom app and even use a webhook into your own services. The other function they introduced to help with load identification is called network device identification, and this listens to broadcast non-data carrying packets such as ARP, ZeroConf, UPnP, and others. This helps Sense to try to identify devices that are connected to your network and may broadcast when they turn on. There's been a whole slew of misunderstanding around what this actually does and its privacy implications, so if you're not comfortable, don't turn it on. It is an opt-in function, and no, it isn't doing ping sweeps, which aren't a thing. It's not doing deep packet inspection, and it's not forwarding your data to Sense, because if it was, you'd see a large spike in your uploads and you'd be able to identify all the outgoing traffic from your network. In August, Sense released an Alexa skill, and this allows you to query things such as how much power you're using, how much solar you're generating, as well as when devices turn on and off. Alexa, launch Sense.
Welcome to Sense. I can give you insights into your energy use and device usage at home. How can I help you?
How much energy am I using?
Your home is using 926 watts.
Alexa, ask Sense when my fridge turned off.
Your fridge turned off 2 hours ago at 6:59 p.m.
Hopefully Sense continues to expand on their integration, such as with Google Home and other devices, and eventually with a public API. Another user has reverse engineered the API off the Android app, and that's available on GitHub. In September, Sense released electricity billing, which allows you to set the start date of your bill and a single fixed cost, so there's no multi-tier or time of use billing just yet, unlike the Neurio. One thing that I have been doing with data from both Neurio and Sense is taking a look at my total usage and trying to line that up with my bill, and then prepaying my bill before it's due to see how close I can actually get to the actual cost. For the past few months, I've been pretty close. I'm off by about $2 or $3, and I'm usually overestimating it. Since I started filming this video in March, Sense continues to improve their device detection and release new features as shown earlier in this video. I have a handful of devices that Sense recently identified that I have yet to name as they come on during the day or overnight. I'll have to do some investigation and flip some breakers to try to isolate them. In September, the first TV started showing up, and while my own Sony TV hasn't been found yet, plenty of Samsungs and LGs have been. This bodes well, as these are electronic devices and not the typical heater, motor, or other electrical devices. This is an important distinction, as electrical devices typically interact directly with the power lines, whereas electronic devices almost always have a power supply that converts AC power into other forms, and often they have filtering circuitry which can mask their signature. Sense also finally released notifications for when it goes offline. Going back to the issue of device identification, I want to address something that's been brought up more than a few times, using a smart plug. From my perspective, Sense isn't a hardware company, and they're not going to expend the resources to create a smart plug, and this is why. First, it only works with 110 volt devices. This already limits its functions to lower wattage devices. Next, on-off data is already provided by the CTs, and while many users have requested a training mode, this requires a whole slew of back-end functionality to support the smart plug. The Wi-Fi enabled plug would need to communicate with Sense and then sync up with the user while they go through a predetermined set of steps and other actions. As any developer will tell you, users always mess stuff up. The number of people that would A. purchase additional costly hardware and B. precisely follow the instructions to provide useful data is slim. Next, device identification is based on a unique voltage signature. This requires the plug to have signal processing circuitry similar to what's inside the Sense, vastly raising its price. Lastly, this defeats the entire premise of energy disaggregation, the measuring of energy at a single point, and identifying sub-devices from it. If you had wanted something with multiple sensors, you should have chosen another offering like Energy Curb or Broltec. For reference, I've hooked up a scope to the power line, and while this isn't a network analyzer, so it can't pull in the detailed readings that Sense would be using, one of the things I can do is a fast Fourier transform, and what this does is it isolates all the frequencies that are on the voltage line. So as expected, the biggest spike is at 60 Hz, which is North American power, and then you can see other spikes such as around 85, and another harmonic at 180. So Sense is undoubtedly using this and other data that it's reading off the voltage lines to try to isolate devices. I'll turn on the TV and you'll see that the signature shifts. TV takes a few seconds to boot up, and then I'm going to turn it off and you'll see it shift back. And there it is. Each device's unique signature can be affected by a variety of things, such as the quality of wiring in your home, other devices that are on at the same time, as well as which phase it's on. This is why sometimes when Sense identifies a device on one outlet, it may not show up on another outlet because the signature is slightly different. As Sense collects more and more data, it'll get better at isolating that device across all your outlets. At work, one of the functions of our devices is to measure the power, so we use a variety of CTs. This is a hinge CT. This is a split core. Open it up, wrap it around the cable, and then put it back on. And these CTs, when they're not utility grade, they're only accurate to about 1 or 2%. And that's why CTs aren't enough for Sense to be able to measure and isolate devices. Same thing with an ammeter. So I've now had Sense installed for over 55 weeks. That's 1 year and 3 weeks. And while it still hasn't found some loads I use daily, such as the range hood and bathroom fans, the progress it has made, especially with detecting loads under 150 watts, such as TVs, and the continued development look promising. As an ever-curious engineer, I've also pre-ordered the ecosimi and should be receiving it in Q1 2018. I look forward to pitting it against the Sense and Neurio and comparing all three. ecosimi has a lower price point, and you can use my referral for a further discount. Be sure to visit the official Sense forums as well as their blog for the latest updates. The Facebook group, while active, can get very noisy, and alas, too many users lack an understanding of what Sense does and how it works, leading to plenty of useless threads and lots of misunderstanding. Sense themselves is partly at fault here, as their marketing in its abilities was definitely overzealous, but frankly, anyone spending hundreds of dollars should really do their research. This is not a product for the impatient. Hopefully this series of videos has been helpful in that respect. With respect to other reviews, such as the one from CNET, while their content is typically well done and thorough, the fact that they've installed the Sense in their model home that no one actually lives in means that the loads aren't getting cycled or used in any appreciable context. This will severely hamper Sense's ability to identify loads, so while it's great that more reviews of Sense are popping up, again, remember that Sense isn't a product whose performance can be meaningfully judged in the short term. As I stated before, unfortunately too many people do not understand how Sense works and subsequently make ignorant comments about it. Here's one such comment from the Facebook group that was proven wrong about 5 months later. On a side note, for those trying to navigate the Facebook group, or really Facebook in general, a few quick tips. 1. Facebook has a search. Please use it. 2. Reply to the proper inline comment instead of to the main thread. And 3. You can subscribe to a thread without mucking it up with one-word comments which provide no value and just ending up sending useless notifications to everyone. This also works on mobile as well. Lastly, since people have apparently forgotten grade school English, apostrophes do not make words, acronyms, or initialisms plural. The Germans call it the idiot's apostrophe for a reason. As always, thanks for watching and subscribing, and be sure to check the description for more links and info. If you'd like to support this channel and are looking to purchase AV cables, smartphone accessories, networking tools, or any of the other products on Prime Cables, be sure to use the referral link below. Thanks.